I'm joined on the Crispin Flintoff show by Steve Walker from Skwawkbox. And you came down to London for the trial of Tony Greenstein at the Old Bailey. I've got your story from yesterday, the breaking news that Greenstein terror trial for anti-genocide comments set for almost a year off. And then you've written. Jewish anti-genocide activist Tony Greenstein's trial for alleged support for a proscribed organisation has been set for almost a year off, starting 5th of January 2026. Greenstein has been charged under the Terrorism Act 2000 for an ex-post defending the right of Palestinians to resist illegal occupation, a right that is enshrined in international law. So I just can't get my head around. He goes for trial, and then I was thinking, oh, this is going to be days and days of trial, and we'll get a verdict. And he's got to wait a year. I mean, what is it? Was that a trial? What was it?
This was always another, going to be an admin type session, basically, where they would agree things or be told things by the judge that were going to happen for the proceedings. So it was never going to start today. They were going to decide on a venue and they were going to decide on scheduling, etc. I think it's. I mean, there are a couple of issues. I mean, it was the supposed offence was online, so therefore it's location independent, but they want to put it in Kingston, and whether that is because it's a fairly right-wing area and they would assume to be drawing a jury pool from more kind of right-inclined potential jurors, I don't know. But the judge didn't seem keen to entertain the prospect of moving it to the Old Bailey, which is more kind of central London, bordering on the East End, obviously. So that's still, she's left the door open that it can, the lawyers can submit that they should move it, but it's also very inconvenient for Tony because he's got a disabled son that he needs to be on call for as well, and be able to get down there quickly in the event of an emergency. So he put that to the judge, but at least as of yesterday, she wasn't having it. It was interesting because I was in the court for the preparatory hearing beforehand as well, which was the case of a young man who's been accused of support and spreading material supporting ISIS. Now, I mean, that was interesting because our government now seems to support ISIS, given that they're playing ball with the new Syrian regime. But also, the judge was quite accommodating on that in terms of bail and in terms of other things. And my impression was, and this is just personal, but my impression was that she was less accommodated with Tony for a single Twitter comment than she was with the guy who had allegedly been storing and disseminating videos supporting ISIS and other terror groups. So I don't know. It's
I mean, if he's alleged of being some sort of terrorist, I mean, it's being charged under the Terrorism Act. How is a year appropriate? I mean, if there is a real terrorist who's dangerous, I mean, you give him
yes.
a year to like stew on a particular possible trial. I mean, if they are really like for the cause, they'll do anything for it. You give them a year, you put them on bail, you think, well, actually, they can just, there's the bail conditions. I mean, maybe you could tell us what they are, but I don't think there's something like you can't get out of your house or, he can do all kinds of things, can't he?
Yeah, I mean, they did. I understand originally tried to impose on him a ban on using the internet, which he successfully got overturned last year by his lawyers. But the conditions now aren't particularly onerous. He has to reside at his home address. He has to get permission if he wants to leave the country for any reason. Basic stuff like that. I can only give you what I think is going on in terms of the overall picture. Is that the government is using anti-terror laws, misusing anti-terror laws against activists who support Palestinian human rights, who oppose Israel's genocide, also against the environmental protest movement. And, they once it comes to a trial, and if the jury kicks that out, as they should do, because it's obviously ridiculous to treat these very minor things as a terrorist offence, then it becomes much harder for them to continue using that. So I think it would be in the government's interest to have the trials set as far off as possible, so that they can continue using that tactic as long as possible against people. as a means of trying to deter protest and make things easier for Israel, make things easier for the oil industry and so on. And it's not the first time. I mean, we've seen the case with these Palestine Action people, mostly kids. I think there's 12 or 14 of them now, who've been put in prison with no bail, and given trial dates more than a year away from when they were put in prison. And there's this phrase I hear people using quite often. That's sort of about making the process the punishment. So if they don't think they're going to get a conviction, they'll punish people as much as they can through, by making them, putting them in prison, putting them under restrictive bail conditions for as long as they possibly can, on the assumption that even if they ultimately get found not guilty, it's still a deterrent to try to discourage other activists from doing their bit in terms of opposing, whether that's the destruction of Gaza or the destruction of the environment around the planet.
Well, I'm here today because I'm being charged under the Terrorism Act with speaking out in support of Palestinian resistance. And that's really what it's about. The terrorism laws are being used as a pretext to clamp down on freedom of speech. And I think we all know that it's got nothing at all to do with terrorism. That is the device that they are using to get people in line with their foreign policy objectives, which are genocide, supporting genocide in Gaza. And my view is simple. There's an absolute right of an oppressed people to resist their occupation, and no one can take that away from them. To say the Palestinians don't have the right to resist genocide is an absolutely absurd phenomenon. It's a procedural hearing. Where it goes from here, I do not know. If I was to be found guilty, there's a maximum of 14 years. Right. So we are moving to an authoritarian state. We are sleepwalking into a police state, because if you open your mouth and you say the wrong thing, you will get lifted by the anti-terrorist police. The judges will do their best to see you convicted. We can be assured of that. When I walk into a court, there will be two prosecutors, one on the bench and one below. The Western powers support Israel, come hell or high water. That really is what it's about. So thank you everyone for coming today. It's really great to see so many people, and this has to be the beginning of a much bigger movement. This isn't about me, it's about an attack on the movement. We know that other people like Sarah Wilkinson, Natalie Strecker, Richard Medhurst have also been arrested. It's a complete abuse of anti-terrorism laws. We know what terrorism is. It's Manchester Arena bombing. It's the stabbings at London Bridge. It's the attack, the Bataclan attack in Paris. That is what terrorism is, and terrorism is usually the product of imperialist intervention in the Middle East. Yes. There was no ISIS before the invasion of Iraq. There was no Afghanistan before the US got involved there. So terrorism is something which is a product of MI5, the intelligence services, and the state activities. So this is not about terrorism, this is about dissent, the right to protest, and more importantly, the right to oppose imperialism. Because when they prescribe organisations, what they are in essence doing is, you cannot support anti-colonial movements, you cannot support resistance organisations. The idea, for instance, that Hamas, which I don't support politically, doesn't have the right to resist the terrorist occupation of Gaza and the West Bank is an absurdity. What it really means is you're forbidden from opposing imperialism itself, because you're forbidden from supporting the resistance. And the same goes for Turkish Kurdistan. The PKK is also proscribed. So it's a completely unlawful act that they've done, because there is an inalienable international law right to resist occupation. And the right of the Palestinians to resist Israel's occupation is no different from the right of the Viet Cong to oppose Americans' occupation of Vietnam, or the French right to oppose the Nazi occupation of France. They are all the same. So if you prescribe one and not the other, you are making a political choice. And that's why this is a political trial, or it will be a political trial. And of course, the judges will try to rule out defence and say it's the law and so on. My response to that is it's an oppressive law, it's a bad law, it's a law which flies in the face of international law, and more basically, it is a law which undermines the very right to free speech, and without free speech, there is no democratic society. If the intention is to silence me, they have another thing coming. I will not be silenced. Thank you very much for coming.